Hey friends, Christy here with Little Roots Ranch, and today we're going to be talking about gardening tips for the Pacific Northwest in September. And so this video will start off by talking about general tips and then talk about plants or seeds that you can start in early September, so right now, that you can enjoy from fall on into winter, and then also what to plant in the end of September so that way they can overwinter and you can enjoy them in the spring. So let's get started. Okay, so in thinking about September, one thing is usually the weather, sorry, I got an itch. Usually the weather starts to cool down a little bit in August, but we didn't experience that this previous month. And so by default, September has to cool down a little bit. And so there's several things that are working against the garden especially in September. And that is that the difference in the daylight every day is significantly decreasing. Right around the solstice or just after, and even just before, the changes aren't too big. But for those of you that have chickens and are putting your chickens away every night, there's definitely a marked difference in the time that you put them. I think right now we're currently at 8:07 p.m. and that's usually when the sun's getting really low, and so we put the chickens away. But not only that, the decreasing daylight, but also decreasing temperatures, and I'm starting to notice the rooster. I'm starting to notice some of those cool, crisp breezes, winds, whatever that fall is known for. And so there's a lot of things going on in your garden. Everything that you've been putting into the garden thus far is at full production or just finished or you know what I mean, like, or coming soon will be coming to an end. And that includes summer specialties like tomatoes and cucumbers and all of your squashes and stuff like that. We've still got more time, of course, but everything unfortunately does come to an end. But there are still things that you can do as far as tasks in September for the gardening. One thing, if you're doing overwintering like cover crops or whatnot, and that would generally is like non-food items, that would be the time to plant those. I'm not sure that that's necessarily a beginner gardener thing. I like to always keep roots in the soil, and so what I'll do is I'll plant like I already did the starts, but little kale plants and just different things that are hardy, and I'll kind of plant them here and there throughout the beds. Whether they make it or not, they provide roots that are alive, or at least most of the winter. And so I like that because then it keeps the soil alive at least. More is better, of course, but also letting the soil rest on some level. It's usually by now in September for eating this year, it's usually too late to plant if you are wanting to enjoy over the winter. You're going to want to plant, and I'll get to a seed list of what you can start. But usually that needs to get started under cover. So like in a greenhouse here, or if you have those little plastic like cloche things, or you have like a low tunnel where it's like, you know, especially if you're doing greens or something like that, if it's like 12 inches high and like, I don't know, 24 inches wide or something. I think they have them on Amazon or any garden place, usually like 6 feet, 10 feet, 12 feet. Of course, they also have them for like 300 feet from like farm stores and stuff like that. But that would be also turkeys. That would also fit under like when you talk about like protected culture or things like that. If you are going to want to, if you don't have that, which is obviously fine, then you're looking at later September planting outside, and which is fine, but that you're not going to, those items you're not going to be getting for like to eat in the fall and the winter. Those will be overwintered, and you'll start to see them growing more in the spring. So that's kind of a key difference. Early September, you're planting for like fall into winter grazing, right? And in the late September, that's where you're going for overwintering. If you have perennials, and now is the time to divide them. It's always hard. I guess I'd probably need to do a whole video on it. I don't have as many because I do a lot of vegetables, but if you have a garden, and it could be any plants like peonies, hostas, iris, lily, daisies, any of those things, you're gonna wanna divide them. And a good rule of thumb is that you divide in the fall if it flowers in the spring, and you divide in the spring if it flowers in the fall. And so September is a perfect time for that. You want to try and wait till you're going to have a few overcast days, so that way you can like take advantage of the plant like getting back on its feet literally, you know, and being able to water it in and deal with the stress of being you know, basically torn apart gently. But you know, it's definitely stressful on the plants. Fall is the time of the slugs. Just like in the spring, you remember that the slugs were coming out. We don't have, as of this recording, we don't have any rain in the forecast, but it's coming. And when it does, so are those more moist soils. Fall is a breeding time for slugs. So if you're walking by a slug and you see a slug, you think 4,000 eggs, because that's how many eggs a slug will lay. And you want to do whatever you're gonna do with that slug, whether you leave it or not. I pick them up and rehome them to the duck habitat. But that's something to consider. Those slug mamas are gonna be laying eggs coming soon in the fall, and that sets up next year's slug crop. So something to keep in mind. Let's see, I'm looking at my notes if I had anything. Oh, I know I'm gonna get to this, but if you're overwintering, or even for fall winter, your crops, you don't wanna add any nitrogen or fertilizers. And the reason why is that you don't want your plants to get, especially for overwintering, you don't want them to get so big, especially growing at an unnatural pace, like faster than normal, for several reasons. One, you don't want them weak, and smaller plants survive overwintering better than larger plants. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but it's kind of like children are more resilient, or like baby birds can like fall from like high things, or so, I don't know. But it's something to keep in mind. If you're wanting to give them a good start or whatever, don't. If you want to add nitrogen or fertilizer, natural or what, you'll want to do that in the spring once it's warming up a little bit, and you want to make sure that the plant can absorb it. But that'll be a later video, of course. So let's see here. Let's talk about I made a list because I always forget, and I swear sometimes I have a different mind when I'm doing the video, and then I'll watch it and I'm like, I didn't mean to say that. My last video I referred to the walk-in cooler exclusively as a greenhouse. I don't know what was going on in my head. But anyways, so these, again, these are what you're planting early spring. Of course, it always depends on your microclimate and stuff like that. If you're farther north of me or farther south, you know, it's a little bit of a difference, but not too big. But these are things that you're going to plant. Nature's unpredictable, so when you're getting this close, it's kind of like the final planting. You know, it is what it is. So sometimes it doesn't always work out. If we have a crazy storm, you know, right in November, that could mix things up. But on average years, this is what you're planting to eat in the fall into the winter. They won't necessarily be growing in the winter, but you can still eat them in the winter. And they are, again, planting list, seeding list, whatever. Beets, but only for greens, meaning not the root, the beets, the beet greens, sorry. Spinach, Swiss chard, cilantro, arugula, Asian greens, radishes. And those are also kind of things that you plant early spring, because those are the ones that are the most cold hardy. Now I have an additional list called a sensitive list. Now I'll be honest with you, I'm not a weather forecaster or anything like that, but I think that this winter is going to be cold again, and then I think we're gonna get a break. That's based on nothing, but that's my like opinion or whatever. And so I think it's going to be really cold. Now these sensitive crops are ones that I always go for, and some years they're great and some years they don't make it because they're cold hardy, but they're a hair less cold hardy than the other ones. So these are your sensitive maybes. I'm still gonna plant them, but just keep in mind that if we have 8-degree days again, it's gonna be bad. Oh, also, I know a lot of people think snow is bad, and this is gonna be weird if you're not used to this situation, but snow is actually great for the garden. Here's the reason why. Snow is an insulator. And so when snow falls and it covers your plant or tree or whatever, as long as it's not in the blooming stage and it's like an orange or something like that, that's more for the south. But your average garden, especially your hardy crops, when the snow falls on it, it actually insulates it from the heat from the ground and the heat that the plant's putting off. And it's actually amazing. Where you run into problems is where it's really, really, really cold and the snow's not falling, because then your plant is directly being exposed to colder temperatures, even if it were the same with snow and the wind and stuff like that. So if you come out and you see your garden covered in snow and it's an especially cold day, like in December or February or whatever, that's actually a good thing, because if your plants are covered in snow, you can actually relax a little bit, even though it looks really scary. And a lot of times they look a little frozen right away or whatever, but usually they will all recover. But anyways, this is your sensitive list. So things that may make it and may not, depending. I think it's gonna be a cold winter. I'm not psychic though, so we'll see. But anyways, just a few items. Mustard, turnips for the turnip greens, endive, and lettuce. And so lettuce varies because there's different like types of lettuce. I just speak to like general lettuce. There are lettuces that are best for the heat of the summer, especially like people in the south or hotter regions grow those, or overwintering lettuce. There's also like specially bred lettuce and stuff like that. But honestly, it really depends. And especially, I know I've said this before, but especially on your microclimate or where you're at. If you've got shade most of the time, or you've got a small yard and your house blocks the sun, especially when like around the winter solstice and everything's like low and stuff like that, it's going to be way colder for your plants. Whereas if you're in open area, then it's going to be a little bit warmer. Okay, so now we're going to move to things to sow in late September, and these are for overwintering. And here's one thing I want to let you know about, is that when these are going to grow slow. These are going to, if you're not familiar with the way that plants grow, heat and sun are like accelerators for plants. A plant that, like if you plant a radish in like, I don't know, August, it'll be ready in like 21 days. If you plant a radish in late September, it will be ready in the spring, which is a lot of days. Don't make me do the math. But it literally is a multiple of days that's needed. And realistically, plants generally, spinach is pretty hardy, but generally will not grow if there are less than 10 hours of sunlight in the day. Again, that depends. If your area, your garden area is shaded, that's even less. But 10 hours of day is about the main part where it's like the plants are like, you know what? I'm just going to hang out and I'm going to wait till conditions improve. Well, that's like February, March. I don't remember offhand. I'll have to look. And of course, it's dependent on where you're at, north or south or whatever. And your plant will just hang out. And that's the whole point of overwintering. Now, most people think that you want to take a big plant into overwintering. You would be wrong. You want to take a small plant. And what does small plant mean? We're talking about 4 to 8 true leaves. Now, remember, the very first leaves a seedling has is called the cotyledon leaves. And so those are just the leaves that are in the seed that start the plant or whatever. Those don't count. They usually all look the same. They don't resemble and then the secondary leaves, which are the first true leaves, but the second physical leaves. So you want like 4 to 6, 8, whatever of the true leaves going into the winter. You don't want a big plant, and you don't want cotyledon stage. You want like a toddler plant. But anyway, so these are the list of things that you're going to sow, and these can be outside or inside, like under cover or outside in the dirt. Excuse me, not under cover. Of course, they'll do better under cover, but they're perfectly fine outside. And remember, these are going to get to a baby stage over winter and then pop in spring. Way faster than if you planted them or started them in spring. They don't have that same pop. They're going to work on the root system. They're going to hang tight during the winter and then pop. Hopefully pop. Hopefully we have a better spring next year. But anyways, so these are things sowing late September. So the list is a little similar to the earlier list, just as a heads up. But beets, you can get regular beets, not just the greens this time. Spinach, Swiss chard, carrots, cilantro, barley, oats, rye, wheat. I kind of want to try wheat. I do have some old seed. I don't even know if it would germinate. Sorry, arugula, Asian greens, mustard, radish, snow peas, fava beans, endive, and lettuce. And a few notes to that. So on the carrots, historically, I have always planted carrots in the first week of December under cover. And what I have is a raised bed. It's cedar, and I fill with compost to like 1 to 2 inches from the top, maybe like 2 to 3. And then in the first week of December, I put all my carrot seeds in, and then I've got big glass things that came out of like a residential construction job or whatever, and I cover that so it's like a greenhouse, unheated of course. And then I pull the covers, make sure they're getting enough water and stuff like that, and then pull the covers as it starts to warm up. And that's always worked really nice for me. But word to everybody is that I've been struggling a lot recently because the last couple years, because the winters have been colder than normal, and therefore carrots are biannual, means they produce after 2 years, well, 2 growing seasons or 2 growing seasons, whatever. And so, but the thing is that sometimes they can take their earlier season, like December, and then maybe February is considered winter, and then a growing season of March, and consider that 2 growing seasons, even though it's the same, like it's in one calendar or one, year or whatever. And so I've been having a lot of carrots that are bolting over winter. So I'm assuming that that's because it's the cold weather. So I guess what the point of sharing that is to, one, watch your carrots when you come into the spring, check for their size. And if you start seeing them elongate, you want to get them pulled, even if they're a little smaller, because once they go to seed, they develop that thick core and they're inedible. But so that's the one reason. And then also, of course, this would be an earlier planting, which allows them to get more established. The December plantings, I don't necessarily recommend that to like fully everyone unless you have the ability to keep them warm. And what I'm going to try and do is, I think, cover them more through February, because I usually just cover them to germination, but I think I'm going to cover them all the way through, and I think that'll prevent. So that'll just be a side experiment. For radishes, you also want to keep your eye on them because they're quote unquote 21 days DTM, right? Or whatever. You want to keep an eye on those, because in the spring when they do pop, they'll go really fast and then they'll go right into bolting, or getting too big and getting more of like a bitter taste and stuff. And then lastly, I already mentioned slugs, but when you're overwintering anything, slugs are your enemies. Rabbits too, depending. And of course your area may have different predators or whatever, but definitely slugs in the fall and in the spring. Nothing tastes better than your produce. You know it, and so do the slugs. So have a plan for that, so that way you don't get too mad, because it does happen, whether you plant a little bit more or you use like it's like a sluggo type material, or you use the picking material, or you do nothing, or whatever your gardening philosophy is. Just have that in the back of your head, and so that way you can be prepared for that. But anyway, so these are the September gardening tips for the Pacific Northwest, Zone 8B, but give or take a letter or a number. I just wanted to share that, and thank you for watching. Happy gardening. Bye.